Right now, somewhere in Dubai, there's a hole in the ground worth $1 billion. And that might be the most honest thing Dubai has ever built. Think about that for a second. A city that built the tallest building on Earth, that constructed entire islands shaped like palm trees, that turned a desert coastline into one of the most photographed skylines in the world. That city has, at its very center, an enormous excavation that's been sitting largely untouched for years. No gleaming tower, no record-breaking observation deck, no completed neighborhood glittering around it. Just a construction site frozen in place, and a story that nobody in the real estate world seems particularly eager to tell. I've spent time digging into what actually happened with Dubai Creek Tower and the broader Dubai Creek Harbor project. And what I found isn't a simple story of failure or fraud or conspiracy. It's something more interesting than that. It's a window into how mega projects actually work, why they get announced, and what happens when the gap between ambition and physics and economics becomes impossible to close quietly. Let me take you back to 2016, because you need to understand what Dubai actually promised the world. April 2016, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum personally unveils the plans for Dubai Creek Tower. And the plans aren't modest. Nothing about Dubai ever is. The tower was designed by Spanish-Swiss architect Santiago Calatrava Valls, the same man behind the World Trade Center's Oculus Transit Hub in New York, the same architect whose work looks less like engineering and more like someone gave a poet a degree in structural mechanics. The Creek Tower was envisioned to surpass the Burj Khalifa. Not just match it, surpass it. At a proposed height of over 1,300 meters, though the final height was deliberately kept mysterious, with officials saying only that it would be well above 1 kilometer, this was meant to be the new tallest structure in human history. An observation deck at 600 meters, a vertical garden running up its spine, a design inspired by the shape of a lily, its cable structure fanning outward like petals from a central core. The budget? Various estimates put total development costs, including the surrounding Dubai Creek Harbor District, a 6 square kilometer development along the historic Dubai Creek Waterway, at somewhere between $32 billion and figures that analysts suggest could ultimately approach $100 billion when accounting for full build-out. That's not the tower alone. That's the ecosystem around it. The island infrastructure, the residential towers, the marina, the retail, the hotels. The entire urban district that the tower was supposed to anchor. Ground was broken in 2016. Construction began. Calatrava's firm started on design development. Emaar Properties, Dubai's largest developer and the same company behind the Burj Khalifa, launched sales of residential units in the surrounding district. People bought, investors committed. But here's where this story gets stranger, because it was never just about a tower. Dubai Creek Harbor was conceived as a complete city district, not an addition to Dubai, a parallel destination. The marketing vision placed it alongside, and in some projections, above, downtown Dubai as a global address. There were concept renders showing walkable waterfront promenades, a restored traditional souk atmosphere blended with contemporary architecture, residential towers housing tens of thousands of people, and at the heart of all of it, this impossible lily-shaped spire reaching into the clouds. The sales were real. Units in the surrounding towers were sold to buyers from around the world, investors from India, the UK, China, across the Gulf. Show apartments were built, progress reports were issued. Construction activity on the supporting infrastructure, roads, utilities, foundations for the residential buildings, did move forward in meaningful ways during the initial years. But if you look at the actual development today, and I mean really look, not at the marketing materials, but at verified satellite imaging and reports from journalists and analysts who have documented the site, what you find is a neighborhood that exists in fragments. Some residential buildings completed and occupied, others standing as shells. Retail and hospitality infrastructure largely absent. The waterfront promenades that featured so heavily in the marketing, partially realized at best in some sections, absent in others. And the tower itself? The foundation excavation was completed. The central concrete core began. And then, progress slowed dramatically. Officially, construction has never been formally cancelled. Emaar has, at various points, reaffirmed commitment to the project. But the pace of work visible at the site in recent years has prompted widespread industry commentary about the project's status. And the timelines originally announced have long since passed without milestone completions. The moment the world stopped paying attention to Dubai Creek Harbour is worth examining very carefully. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way these things usually happen, gradually, then quietly. In 2019 and 2020, the global pandemic arrived and effectively gave any developer with a struggling mega project the perfect cover to slow or pause construction with minimal public scrutiny. Supply chains broke down worldwide. Labor markets were disrupted. Interest rates began their climb. The economic environment that had made Dubai's ambitions feel inevitable shifted considerably. But here's the thing. The pandemic isn't the whole story, because some of the project's deceleration predates COVID. Some analysts covering Gulf real estate markets noted signs of slowing progress in 2018 and 2019, before any of the global disruption arrived. This is important context, because it suggests the project was navigating headwinds even in more favorable conditions. There's also the matter of the tower's design itself posing genuine engineering challenges. Calatrava's aesthetic vision is extraordinary, but it is not typically described as budget-friendly to execute. The cable-stayed Lily design, essentially a massive vertical structure with cables extending outward from a central concrete core, requires engineering solutions that are novel at this scale. Some structural engineers who have publicly commented on the project have noted that the heights being discussed push into territory where the engineering costs grow non-linearly, where solutions that work at 500 meters become dramatically more complex at 1,300 meters. None of that means it can't be built. The Burj Khalifa seemed impossible too, until it wasn't. But it does mean the gap between the render and the reality is substantial, and the financial commitment to close that gap is enormous. I want to talk about why this keeps happening, not just in Dubai, but everywhere ambitious architecture collides with economic reality. There's a pattern in mega project development that researchers and economists have documented quite thoroughly, and once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere. It's sometimes called optimism bias, and it's not unique to Dubai or to architecture. It shows up in infrastructure projects, in government programs, in major technology initiatives. The basic mechanism works like this. At the announcement stage, the incentives all favor ambition. Announcing a record-breaking tower generates enormous publicity, drives investor interest in surrounding properties, positions a city or developer as a global player, and attracts talent and capital. The costs of that announcement are relatively low. The upside is enormous. But then comes the execution phase, where the costs are real, and the engineering is real, and the interest rates are real. And at that point, the calculation changes completely. Scaling back is embarrassing. Cancelling is an admission of failure. So projects often enter a kind of limbo, not officially cancelled, not actively progressing, frozen somewhere between ambition and reality, while developers and governments try to find a path that preserves face and recovers economics. Oxford researcher Bent Flyvbjerg has spent decades studying this phenomenon across major infrastructure projects worldwide, and his findings are striking. Large projects across virtually every category tend to run significantly over budget and behind schedule, with the overruns often being substantial. The bigger and more novel the project, the more pronounced this tendency becomes. Dubai Creek Tower is not uniquely flawed. It's an extreme example of a universal challenge. What makes it interesting is the scale. When you're talking about a development of this size, the tower plus the entire surrounding district, the numbers involved are so large that conventional real estate market forces struggle to absorb the supply. The residential units sold in the surrounding towers represent real people's real investments, real homes, real expectations, When the anchor around which all of that was organized doesn't rise as promised, the ripple effects through property values, rental expectations, and community formation are concrete and significant. So what does the site look like today? That's a question that deserves an honest answer rather than a diplomatic one. Based on what journalists, analysts, and real estate professionals who operate in the Dubai market have documented publicly, the picture is mixed in ways that depend heavily on which part of the development you're examining. Some residential towers within Dubai Creek Harbor are completed, occupied, and by most accounts function as legitimate residential addresses. MER has delivered units to buyers in several buildings. There is a population living in the district. There's some retail and community infrastructure serving those residents. The waterfront master plan, the promenades, the cultural institutions, the public spaces that were supposed to make this a destination rather than just a residential cluster, is substantially incomplete relative to what was marketed. The tower site itself remains at early structural stages. The foundation and initial concrete core work represent real, expensive construction that has been completed. But rising above that to the heights promised, that work has not materially progressed in the way that original timeline suggested. Emaar has, as recently as in the past couple of years, continued to describe the project as active rather than cancelled. They point to completed phases and ongoing infrastructure work. Independent analysts and journalists covering Gulf real estate tend to characterize the project's current status with considerably more skepticism about the originally envisioned timeline. The honest summary is this: what was presented as an integrated, transformative city district is currently a partially built development anchored by a construction site rather than by a completed tower. That is a significant gap between promise and current reality. Here's the part that most people covering this story get wrong. They treat this as an ending, when it might be something more complicated. Dubai has a track record that deserves serious consideration before writing any project off. The Palm Jumeirah was described as an engineering fantasy when it was proposed. It exists. The Burj Khalifa was called economically unsustainable during and after the 2008-2009 financial crisis that hit Dubai extremely hard. It stands as the tallest building in the world. Dubai's broader economic resilience over the past decade, including attracting substantial inflows of global wealth, talent, and tourism, has repeatedly surprised analysts who projected more linear decline. The economic conditions that froze Dubai Creek Tower's progress, rising interest, rates, pandemic disruption, supply chain challenges, are not necessarily permanent conditions. There are scenarios where shifting global capital flows, declining construction costs, and renewed Gulf investment cycles could revive this project in a meaningful way. There's also a geopolitical dimension worth noting. Dubai operates as a hub for capital that finds other destinations less hospitable. And that function has, if anything, strengthened in recent years. The underlying demand for Dubai as a global address has not collapsed. If anything, the pool of high net worth individuals treating Dubai as a serious permanent or part-time home has grown substantially. What that means practically is that the question isn't whether Dubai Creek Tower will ever be built. The honest answer is that nobody knows. It's whether the economics of completing it will ever align with the ambition of its design. That calculation is sensitive to a lot of variables that remain genuinely uncertain. What we can say with confidence is that the timeline sold to buyers in 2016 and 2017 has not been honored. That the gap between the marketing vision and the current reality is substantial. And that the thousands of people who invested in this district, who bought properties and built plans around the promises made, are living with the consequences of that gap in very concrete ways. The real reason this story matters isn't the tower. The tower is dramatic and visual and easy to talk about because you can point at a hole in the ground and say, that was supposed to be history making. But the story underneath is about something that affects people everywhere who invest in developments, in cities, in promises made by developers and governments about what a place will become. We live in an era where mega projects are announced constantly. New cities in Saudi Arabia, Hyperloop corridors, smart city developments across Asia and Africa. The gap between the announcement event, with its renders and its celebrity architects and its record-breaking claims, and the lived reality of what gets built tends to be enormous. And the people who pay for that gap are rarely the people who held the press conference. What Dubai Creek Tower illustrates, maybe better than any other current example, is that even the most capable and best resource developers in the world run into the fundamental tension between architectural ambition and economic physics. At some scale of complexity and cost, every project faces a reckoning with what things actually cost, what timelines actually require, and whether the market will bear what the vision demands. That doesn't mean don't dream big. The world would be poorer without the Burj Khalifa, whatever its complicated economic history. The impulse to build something that pushes at the limits of what's possible is part of what makes cities interesting. But there's a version of dreaming big that's honest about the risks, that communicates uncertainty to buyers and investors rather than projecting inevitability. And there's a version that sells a certainty it can't deliver. Dubai Creek Harbor sits right now as a monument to that difference. Whether it eventually completes the vision it promised, or whether it becomes a permanent reminder of the distance between a render and a building, that story isn't finished yet. But the chapter we're living through deserves to be told honestly. And now you know it. If stories like this one are the kind of thing you want to keep exploring, the real economics behind the grand visions, the gap between what gets announced and what actually gets built, then stick around, because I keep digging into exactly this territory. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming. There's a lot more ground to cover.